Las Vegas is dying. This is not about casinos going bankrupt or tourists staying away. It is about the single heartbeat that keeps this entire neon oasis breathing, vanishing inch by agonizing inch. Imagine a city of 2 million residents and 40 million visitors per year, where massive fountains dance to music and luxury swimming pools are scattered across the driest landscape in North America. This region receives less than 4 inches of rain every single year. It is a city that defies every law of nature, a glittering monument of human arrogance built on borrowed time. Every single drop of water, every watt of electricity, and every spark of life in this valley comes from one place: Lake Mead, the massive reservoir that made the desert bloom. But in the summer of 2022, something terrifying happened. The water level dropped so low that a massive white bathtub ring became visible from the vastness of outer space. This ghostly mark on the canyon walls is not just a mineral stain, it is a death certificate for the American West, proving that our greatest engineering marvel is finally failing us. As the shoreline retreated, the mud began to give up its secrets. Sunken boats from decades ago emerged, followed by the grisly discovery of human remains hidden inside rusted metal barrels. The residents of Nevada watched in silence as their lifeline shriveled. The docks that once floated on deep blue water now sat uselessly on cracked, sun-baked earth, miles away from the lake. People think this is a sudden disaster caused only by heat. They are wrong. This crisis was actually set in motion over 100 years ago by men who signed a fatal contract. They divided a river that they did not understand, promising water that simply did not exist. They built a paradise on a lie, and now, nature is finally coming to collect the debt. To understand why the lights of Las Vegas might soon go dark forever, we must travel back to a time of greed, bad science, and the most expensive mistake in human history. This is the story of how we tried to conquer the desert and how the desert is now winning. Welcome to the end of the line for the city that shouldn't exist. Prepare yourself to see the terrifying reality of a world without water. This is not a distant prophecy anymore. This is the reality of Las Vegas in 2025. In the midst of the Great Depression, the United States desperately needed a symbol of strength to prove that the nation could still achieve the impossible through sheer will. Construction of the Hoover Dam began in the 1930s, costing $49 million and claiming the lives of over 100 workers who labored in the scorching heat. When it was finally completed in 1936, it created Lake Mead, the largest artificial reservoir in the country, capable of holding over 26 million acre-feet of water. It was hailed as a modern miracle of engineering, but beneath the surface of this triumph, a dark countdown had already begun due to a monumental and fatal legal blunder. To understand the crisis today, we must look back to 1922, when representatives from 7 western states gathered to divide the waters of the mighty Colorado River. These men signed the Colorado River Compact, an agreement that allocated 7.5 million acre-feet of water to both the upper and lower basins every single year. The total promised amount was 15 million acre-feet, a number based on measurements taken during the wettest decades the region had seen in over an entire 1,000 years. They were dividing a ghost river, promising billions of gallons that simply did not exist during normal cycles, effectively writing a check that nature could never possibly cash. For decades, the true state of the river was masked by unusually high rainfall, allowing cities like Las Vegas to explode from a dusty outpost into a sprawling neon metropolis. The population of the valley surged from a few thousand to over 2 million residents, all while massive agricultural empires began to drink greedily from the same shrinking straw. Thousands of acres of alfalfa and cotton were planted in the middle of the desert, requiring astronomical amounts of water that the river was never meant to provide. As Phoenix and Los Angeles grew alongside Las Vegas, the demand for water skyrocketed, even as climate change began to wither the snowpacks that fed the river system. Temperatures rose and evaporation increased, causing the once mighty flow of the Colorado to dwindle into a shadow of its former self, while the human thirst only continued to grow. The 1922 agreement became a legal cage, trapping 7 states in a battle for a resource that was vanishing faster than any politician was willing to admit. By the start of the 21st century, the warning signs were ignored, as luxury golf courses and sprawling suburbs continued to expand across the arid landscape of the Southwest. Every new fountain in Las Vegas and every new farm in Arizona was another nail in the coffin of a system that was fundamentally broken from the start. The arrogance of the past had finally caught up with the reality of the present, leaving millions of people vulnerable to a disaster that was predicted a century ago. But the engineers in Las Vegas were not ready to give up, and they decided to attempt a feat that no other city on the planet had ever dared before. By the summer of 2022, the situation at Lake Mead reached a breaking point that no one in the modern era had ever witnessed before in history. The surface of the water dropped to just over 1,040 feet above sea level, which was the lowest point recorded since the dam was filled. The infamous white bathtub ring grew to the size of a 20-story building, a ghost-like scar composed of minerals that could be clearly seen from orbiting satellites. As the water vanished, it revealed the dark history of the desert, uncovering long-forgotten sunken boats and even metal barrels containing the remains of organized crime victims. Las Vegas depends on Lake Mead for 90% of its total water supply, and the city suddenly realized that its existing intake pipes were about to suck air. The Southern Nevada Water Authority knew they had no choice but to launch a dangerous engineering gamble that cost over $817 million in total. They decided to dig a massive tunnel nearly 3 miles long through the solid rock deep beneath the very bottom of the lake to reach the deepest water. This project, nicknamed the Third Straw, took over 6 grueling years to complete and was plagued by massive flooding and the tragic death of one dedicated construction worker. When the drill finally broke through in September of 2015, the engineers celebrated a victory that gave Las Vegas a temporary lifeline in a rapidly drying world. However, this victory came with a terrifying catch that most residents do not fully understand, involving a concept that engineers call the dead pool elevation point. Dead pool occurs when the water level drops below 895 feet, the point where water can no longer flow through the Hoover Dam generators. If the lake reaches dead pool, the dam stops producing electricity for nearly 1.5 million people, leaving the entire region in a state of darkness. The intake of the Third Straw sits at 860 feet, meaning there is only a tiny 35-foot margin of safety before the city is helpless. Without electricity from the dam, there is no power for the massive pumps that move water into the city, creating a lethal feedback loop during the summer. In a city where summer temperatures frequently exceed 110 degrees, the loss of air conditioning and running water would turn Las Vegas into a trap. There is no fourth straw and there is no backup plan for a city of 2 million people if the water continues to fall toward that final mark. Federal officials have started using words like catastrophic failure to describe what happens next, as the countdown toward the dead pool continues with every passing, cloudless day. While the Third Straw is a miracle of modern science, it is also a stark admission that we are now scraping the very bottom of our collective survival. The Colorado River is the vital lifeblood for 7 different states and 2 nations, supporting the lives and livelihoods of over 40 million people across the vast American Southwest. But as the water levels continue to vanish, the friendly cooperation of the past has transformed into a brutal legal battleground where every single gallon of water now counts. California, Arizona, and Nevada are now locked in a fierce struggle to determine who gets cut first when the river finally fails to reach the thirsty, growing desert cities. In this war for survival, people are searching for someone to blame, and the finger is often pointed directly at the neon lights and dancing fountains of Las Vegas. Most tourists see the massive fountain shows and assume that the city is simply throwing away precious water in a dry and completely unforgiving desert landscape during a crisis. However, the truth is far more complex, because Las Vegas has actually become the world leader in urban water conservation out of pure and desperate necessity for its survival. The city recycles nearly 100% of all indoor water, cleaning it thoroughly and pumping it back into Lake Mead to be used again by the residents and hotels. The real villain in this story is not the casino industry, but the massive industrial farms that consume nearly 80% of the entire flow of the Colorado River system. In the middle of the scorching Arizona desert, farmers are growing extremely thirsty crops like alfalfa and cotton to export them to wealthy countries on the other side of the planet. It takes thousands of gallons of desert water to grow just one single bale of hay, which is then shipped overseas, while local reservoirs drop to dangerous, historic levels. While the citizens of Las Vegas are banned from planting decorative grass, these agricultural empires continue to flood their fields using outdated and extremely wasteful irrigation methods every day. If the federal government chooses to cut water to the farms, the price of food across the entire nation will skyrocket, causing a financial crisis in every American grocery store. But if they choose to cut water to the cities, millions of people will be forced to abandon their homes in what would become the largest forced migration in modern history. The legal agreement signed in 1922 was designed for a world with plenty of rain, but that world has vanished, and the old rules no longer apply to us. Indigenous tribes along the river are also demanding their rightful share, adding another layer of complexity to a legal knot that no politician knows how to untie right now. There is simply not enough water for everyone, and as the negotiations stall, the river continues to shrink, leaving the future of the entire Southwest hanging in the balance. Tensions are rising between neighbors as states threaten to sue each other, turning a natural disaster into a bitter and permanent human conflict for the most basic survival. The ghost of the 1922 Compact still haunts every negotiation, reminding everyone that they are fighting over a promise that was broken a full century ago. In this high-stakes game of poker, nobody wants to fold, but the house always wins, and in this case, the house is a desert that is rapidly reclaiming its territory. Federal officials have issued a grim forecast, warning that Lake Mead could reach a terrifying new historic low by the end of 2027 if current patterns continue. The winter of 2026 was a disaster for the river, with snowpack levels in the Colorado mountains reaching only 29% of their normal historic averages. As the power generation at Hoover Dam faces a massive 40% reduction, the government has begun discussing a concept they call a managed retreat from the desert. This is not a sudden catastrophe where the lights of the city turn off in a single night, but rather a slow and agonizing process of inevitable decline. We will see water prices skyrocket, golf courses turn brown and die, and entire suburban neighborhoods being slowly reclaimed by the drifting sands of the Mojave Desert. Each day the city becomes more expensive to maintain, as the cost of securing water rises faster than the profits from the casinos and the tourism industry. California recently managed to save over 1 million acre-feet of water in just 2 years. But even this heroic effort is merely a temporary band-aid for the crisis. The desert is a patient and ancient force that does not care about our engineering miracles or the billions of dollars we have poured into the dry sand. Las Vegas was built on a bold promise that nature never actually signed, a dream of neon and luxury that was always destined to face this ultimate reckoning. We have spent a century trying to prove that we could bend the Colorado River to our will, but the river is finally showing us its absolute limits. For now, the fountains of Bellagio still dance, and the neon signs of the Strip continue to burn bright against the dark and silent nights of the Mojave. But deep beneath the surface of Lake Mead, the water level is dropping inch by inch, day by day, as the desert slowly waits to reclaim its original territory. The question is no longer whether Las Vegas will eventually disappear, but how much longer we can pretend that we have actually conquered the vast and unforgiving wilderness. As the white bathtub ring around the canyon walls continues to grow, it serves as a permanent monument to our greatest achievement and our most profound environmental failure. Perhaps the desert was never truly defeated. It was simply waiting for the humans to run out of the time and resources that we borrowed from the distant past. We are now living in the final chapters of a story about a city that was never supposed to exist in such a beautiful and incredibly hostile environment. The neon lights may stay on tonight, but the silence of the dry riverbed is the only sound that will truly matter in the dark decades to come. We must face the reality that our grand experiment in the sand is coming to an end, and the price of our ignorance will be paid by everyone. The survival of millions depends on decisions made by people who are still arguing over laws that were written for a climate that has now completely vanished forever.